So thank you very much for accepting the invitation. And last but not least, let's hear about what NATO is doing for us.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We usually think that God is infallible. And he usually, or she, is God. He or she, let's call him she, he, without being politically incorrect. So God is infallible. Usually he is, but not always. And I tell you an anecdote that shows you that he is not always infallible. The anecdote goes back a year or two when in Brussels, Mr. Stoltenberg and Madame von der Leyen were having dinner together and discussing the future of their respective organizations. And both of them thought that their organizations had a future. But they couldn't decide which one has a better future. So they invited God for cognac and cigars to decide. So when he came, Stoltenberg asked him, "My God, tell me, will NATO ever be again strong, feared by allies and loved by, feared by some allies, feared by some, let me separate that word, was close to Vienna, feared by enemies and loved by allies?" And God said that yes, Mr. Secretary General, it will be, unfortunately, not in your lifetime. And then von der Leyen asked the same question about the European Union. God's answer was also positive. He said, yes, it will be, unfortunately not in my lifetime. The jury is still out about the European Union, although I think we are moving closer to a European Union that works. But it's definitely not true what God foresaw. NATO is back, so he was right, but fortunately Stoltenberg is still alive. So, and he's still Secretary General, not for too long anymore, but he's still there. What is the reason that God was wrong? And I think what God did not foresee is that NATO would get an extremely strong, powerful ally. A new ally, an unexpected ally. This ally is sitting in the Kremlin and is called Mr. Putin. Because Mr. Putin brought NATO back. Mr. Putin showed that NATO is needed more than ever since 1990. Let's be frank, between 1990 and 1921, NATO was not brain dead. But was struggling with a mission. We tried to invent different missions, always paying lip service to the basic mission of collective defense, but then we saw that it really is not convincing. There is no enemy that we can show. We started to miss the Soviet Union, actually. So we started to invent new missions, peacekeeping, peace enforcement, cyber security, etc., etc. These are all legitimate and important missions, but it's not enough for NATO. In the meantime, we had the pivot to Asia, we had 9/11, we had Donald Trump. I would having serious difficulties to define which of the three were more devastating. But the three together were probably very devastating for NATO, although we tried to manage, but we could manage Afghanistan to some extent, we could manage cyber security, we could not manage Donald Trump, but fortunately the American people did. So here we are in 2021 with the NATO, with some little missions, a lot of lip service. The Americans started to go back, to come back actually to Europe, slowly but steadily, and we saw the Europeans waking up. But the Europeans have been doing, let's be frank, between 1991 and 2020, let's say, is enjoying the peace dividend, not spending not only money, but also not spending political capital to NATO. We were very upset that Donald Trump came up with a good idea of 2% of GDP for defense, and he came up with bad ideas about NATO. Let's do away with NATO. But we reacted to both, that we basically did very little, if anything. And then came Mr. Putin. I must tell you, just looking back a decade or two, that the West made a lot of big mistakes how we handled Putin. It was a long Munich process, actually. We handled Putin as if in the beginning, Putin was welcome. I mean, some important person looked into his eyes and said that, well, he's a serious person we can deal with. We did reset. We did reset after Georgia. Sarkozy rushed to Russia after Georgia, not allowing the Czech presidency doing anything because he wanted to make peace, and he did make peace with Putin on Putin's terms, basically. We even accused the Georgians that they started the war, which is not true, actually. And then came the Crimea. I don't want to go back, but I just want to tell one sentence. If you want, I can elaborate on this. I think Mr. Putin has been the same Mr. Putin from the very beginning, from day one. He was hiding it. He had to do different things. He had to show a different face, but he has been the same one. The person who won his first election because the KGB blew up some apartment buildings in Moscow and some other Russian cities, and remind you, the popularity of Mr. Putin was at 5% in the beginning of the election campaign, and he won with 55%. And the only thing that happened was the war in Chechnya and the blowing up of the apartment buildings by the KGB, or FSB, or whatever it is, doesn't matter. Let's call it KGB, doesn't matter. So then he came back to his real self in 2007. He basically told us in Munich what he wanted. I was there, and people didn't want him to talk about his speech. Because usually when you have a speech in the Munich Security Conference, in the corridors you discuss the speech afterwards. There was no appetite to discuss it in the corridors after that. We tried to forget about it. And then came Georgia, which we basically left out in the cold. A lot of things happened. I don't want to go into details. What then came decisive was the Crimea in 2014, where we also did not react. Issued statements, imposed some sanctions, which then proved to be very useful, because the effect of those sanctions is biting Russia much more at this point than the effect of the sanctions that we have imposed in the past 9 months. But we basically did not... Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, good. Technology is not my responsibility. I don't know how to do it even. So, anyway, the effect of Crimea was very little, and that encouraged Putin to basically invade eastern Ukraine. That even did not trigger. The tripwire was not there still. And then Putin made something was very smart from his point of view. He what the Russians called maskirovka. He did a big maskirovka in the spring of 2021. He massed the troops on the border, more than 100,000 troops, telling all the time that it was exercising. And then he withdrew the troops. So when he did the same thing in September, he said, okay, I did it in May, so he will withdraw it again. But he did not. So then came September 24th, and then I think to many of us, to me, surprisingly quick became the reaction. And the reaction was pretty much what was the maximum possible speed could have been bigger. We should have done similar things or before that. I mean, weapons deliveries to Ukraine before 2021. But we reacted basically, finding the right way, going to the extreme without jeopardizing NATO's security by provoking a war with Russia. And it works. We have a lot of surprises there, and I don't want to go into the details, just enumerate them. Hungarians remember, especially my age, the ladies don't, reading the novel of Jókai, the Cursive and Berfiai, the Sons of the Stone-Hearted Man, or whatever. It starts with an introduction when the old man dies, and he orders his wife to educate his sons, the 3 sons, to serve the Kaiser. And then the old lady, when he dies, vows that she will do the opposite. That's what happened to Mr. Putin. What he achieved is exactly the opposite of what he wanted. He didn't want to be encircled by NATO, in quotation marks, encircled. NATO got enlarged. He wanted to defeat Ukraine. He is basically being defeated by the Ukrainians and the West. He wanted to eliminate the Ukrainian nation. What he achieved is the finishing of the process, of the nation-building process for Ukraine, for the Ukrainians. And finally, long-term, very importantly, 2 things. The myth of the Red Army is gone. There is no strong Red Army other than on the minds of Mr. Putin, maybe not even there, which is very important because first of all, it's important on the battlefield, but it's also important for the future because apart from gas and oil, the only thing that the Russians could export was weapons. Nobody will buy Russian weapons in the future. Why would you buy weapons that don't work? And he even doesn't have any of them to sell. So that's one, and then the second one is the undermining Putin's position in Russia. I'm not suggesting that Putin is at the end, but what we see is at least the beginning of the end, maybe middle of the process. Putin is not the unquestioned dictator anymore in the Kremlin. He has to fight because there are groups who want to oppose him from right and left. I mean, not politically, but for the peaceniks and the warmongers or whatever you call them, but he has to fight. He has to fight his fights before taking a decision, which has never been the case before. And NATO reacted, I think, the right way. It's a very good feeling to see that our favorite organization is back again on its feet. Many people claim that NATO did not do enough, but when you ask them what else could NATO do, there is no answer. Because then they say, okay, they should do more. What? Shooting war with Russia? No. Then what? So I think NATO has done a lot, and not only in this respect. And I don't want to spend more time on Russia, but we've been talking about too much. I think also in this conference in general too, but the other things of NATO. So NATO has now recognized that there are more than one mission for NATO. That there are also kind of sub-missions for NATO, in addition to the 3 missions that the strategy enumerates. There is a 3.5 mission, which is resilience. It's not called resilience. It is called a force mission, but it is a mission of NATO to strengthen resilience. And we see now that strengthening resilience not only in military terms, in terms of Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, which we have forgotten. We always talk about 5 and sometimes 4, but there is 3. Without 3 there is no 4 and no 5. So, strengthening military resilience, we need to mention resilience and we need to strengthen resilience in terms of the sanctions. We have to be resilient vis-à-vis the negative impact of the sanctions. And that's probably one of the biggest debates in Europe today, and will be increasing in the future. NATO has also been smart enough not to call China a threat, but it was smart enough to mention China first time in a strategic document, and mention China as a challenge. And I think that's what China is. Regionally, it can be a threat for Taiwan, for instance, but for NATO it is not a threat, and we need to make the difference. But calling it a challenge and naming the details of the challenge means that NATO will have to deal with this challenge. And it's very smart not to call it a threat, because militarily NATO is not capable of doing anything serious. I mean, I was in Singapore a few years ago, and then I was sent there by NATO to present how beautiful an organization NATO is, which I did. And then a professor from Singapore asked me that, please tell me, what good would it do if NATO would be involved in the Far East? What capabilities would NATO bring? I said, well, there are the French and there is the British, etc. And they said, well, that's not really important. The Americans have all that. What NATO would bring is committees. That if there is a Chinese attack, there would be no response, but there would be a committee meeting. And the second one and the third one. We don't need that. So I really appreciate what NATO did. And then I think it's also important to mention the rest. I just want to say two sentences about Hungary and NATO. I think what Hungary has been doing in terms of strengthening the Hungarian defense capabilities, and by that also strengthening NATO, is a long due. It has been long due, and it's a positive effect. What we need to do is to integrate all these effects with each other, and to integrate it into NATO. It is also a job for NATO, because we don't have a NATO military strategy yet. So it will come, and by the time we'll have to be ready to do that. Some people suggest that we are doing it for the wrong reasons, maybe, but we are doing the good things. And doing good things for the wrong reasons is still better than doing nothing or doing the wrong things. So I finish here, because I think we need some time for further discussion. And also I'm afraid of the chairperson that I will be punished if I don't. So I do. Thank you very much, and look forward to our discussion.